The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. On leaving the synagogue, Jesus entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Simon's mother-in-law lay sick with a fever. They immediately told him about her, and he approached, and he grasped her hand and helped her up. And then the fever left her, and she waited on them. When it was evening after sunset, they brought to him all who were ill, possessed by demons. The whole town was gathered at the door. He cured many who were sick with various diseases, and he drove out many demons, not permitting them to speak because they knew him. Rising very early before dawn, he left and went off to a deserted place where he prayed. Simon and those who were with him pursued him, and on finding him said, "Everybody is looking for you." And he told them, "Let us go on to the nearby villages, that I may preach there also. For this purpose I have come." And so he went into their synagogues, preaching and driving out demons throughout the whole of Galilee. The Gospel of the Lord. Everybody is looking for you. Well, in some ways, we may live in a world where everybody is kind of looking for something. There's an old song, everybody's looking for something. You travel the world in the seven seas. I think it's an old Stevie Nicks song, right? Well, everybody's looking, I think, not just for something, but for some way of gaining meaning and getting some nourishment and guidance in a time when I think we have a lot of bad news on our news feeds. We've always lived in a world that had bad news. Don't get me wrong. It wasn't always as easy to know all the bad news that's out there because we didn't have the kinds of incredible communications that we certainly have. But we can get pretty quickly the details of all kinds of troubled places, the horrific things that are going on, the deep human suffering that occurs around the world, and it can get pretty overwhelming. We end up in this fifth Sunday of Lent because just having celebrated the great feast of the Presentation on Friday, which is, of course, also Groundhog Day. We might feel more like Groundhog Day than celebrating the light of Christ coming into the world. We might feel like we're on a loop where we're seeing sometimes the same old things over and over, and sometimes to a degree worse than they were in the first or last loop. And it might be that we then look for that light and see it. We also celebrated the feast of St. Blaise, where we take those blessed candles from Candlemas, from the presentation of Jesus in the temple, and we put them on our throats, right, and ask for a blessing to be healed from any ailment of the throat or any other evil. I always like that other part, any other evil that may be holding us back. Well, here today we see Jesus enter into someone's home and life, this particular woman who happens to be related to Simon and Andrew. And he, of course, changes her life and it revives her and allows her to get back to her normal every day, her ordinary. And then, of course, he himself needs a little break from his being in need or needed, and he steps back for a little bit of a break, but he's willing to then keep going on. You and I might feel a little bit like that as we move into February, the shortest chronological month and the longest psychological month. I remember as a first-year teacher when I was telling one of my colleagues, a wonderful sister of charity who was teaching with me at that school at that time, and I said to her, February, I better decide what I'm going to do after this volunteer year of teaching at this school. I got to make a choice. And she said, you got to wait till March, Dan, because February is all desolation. And St. Ignatius of Loyola says in his spiritual exercises, never make a major decision in desolation. So wait till February is over. Well, for those of us who are in the academic year, February is kind of not an easy month to find as much consolation, although I would say that the light of Christ, those shimmers of light that show us that there are graces being offered to us, that there is something out there that can be helpful to us, does break through in the cloudy month of February and the difficult times that we may be experiencing. And we need to look for that. In that feast of the Presentation, we see these fascinating figures that appear only once in the scriptures, Simeon and Anna, and both of them seem to be able to, in their ordinary routine, where they're there at the temple seeing the same rituals, children being brought in the same ritual of presentation as Mary and Joseph bringing their child in, They see these routines, these everydays in their life. They know this, but they're open to seeing somehow, some way, that God will break into this ordinary routine of our lives and give us a real presence of who God is, who Christ is, and let that be for us the light that we need so that we can see the grace that's offered and we can accept it and let it work in our lives. My friends, we live in a world right now where what was once a persistent and constant American optimism has recently been replaced with a politics of grievance, a complaining, and a darkness of our whole reality, a negativity about human nature and how we are with each other. We have been encouraged time and again in any number of influences in our culture to not trust each other, and we have in many ways been susceptible to that growing mistrust among ourselves. We live in a place, too, where we aren't always easily understanding and therefore able to figure out how we can solve some of the most difficult problems we have. Just the other day, I was looking at economic data and saying, my God, over the last 2 years, we've had a slow, methodical recovery from our difficulties in the pandemic, and this has been amazing. We have not had that recession. We did end up with a soft landing. And then you go out and read the surveys of how people feel about the economy, and it's fairly negative, despite the fact that we're doing okay. We're not willing to look at this thing as a glass half full or a progress in work, that we can say, yeah, we've made it this far and we're willing to do the work to keep this going. And so, friends, I think we need that light. We need to be like the Christ in today's gospel, who's willing to come into whatever the ordinary is and whatever the difficult ordinary is, especially that which might even count as suffering, and be able to say, in the midst of this, God is here. God is present. The God who was incarnate, who came into the world and lived our life, who was presented as a child like any other child in the rituals of the temple by his parents, that God who knows our whole experience is the God that will keep breaking through to us with glimmers of light that offer us the graces you and I need. So friends, in this ordinary time, let us not be afraid to know that the God who is one of us, who was one of us, who journeys as one of us and with us now in a very special way, that this God is willing to give you and I what we need by way of that light which is in the world. And then therefore, we don't need to be looking for just something, as the old Stevie Nicks song says. We need to be looking for Christ, as these followers of Christ do at the end of today's gospel. They're willing to say, look, we need you. We need you in some way, and everybody else is looking for something here too. And Christ says, okay, fine, let's go. Let's move on and into the next encounter, the next community, the next crowd of people whom we can use our ability to notice the light of God's grace, to point to it and say, here is a help, a healing, a beautiful thing. And let those glimmers of that beauty, that hope and healing be the things that we keep pointing to conquer what might be the darkness or despair. To let us be the conquerors of what we least desire, that gives us an obscuration of hope, and allow the light of God's grace to be the beautiful thing that we keep pointing to overcome whatever is out there. Amen.